Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dojo Live. I'm Tulio Surgusa broadcasting from sunny Southern California. Today is January, what's today? It's January
I think it's the
25th,
25th. Yeah.
2022. Joining me is Kim Lantis in Hermosillo, Mexico. Hi Kim, welcome back.
Hey.
And from the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, it's Ansu Sharma, who is the co-founder and CEO at Skyflow, joining us today. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us, Anshu. Good to have you.
Likewise.
So today we're talking about privacy. Yes, everyone's favorite topic, privacy and security. But before we go into the topic today and see what we can learn and what we can unpack, we promise it'll be very educational, so stay with us. Let's get to know our guest a little bit. Anshu, if you could please introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then we'll dig in and see what Skyflow is all about. Welcome to the show again.
Well, thank you. The best way to get to know me is through my life story a little bit. I think I'm a Silicon Valley founder now, but I didn't really start that way. I grew up in India in small towns, went to an engineering school in the eastern part of India. It's called IIT. And then I came to the US, went to Chapel Hill. Last 20 years, I worked at some of the largest software companies like Oracle, some of the newest, now large companies like Salesforce, where I helped build out their platform. And then I actually spent 5 years investing in startups. So I'm also a venture capitalist, an angel investor. Some of the companies you might have heard of, if you're a technical person, are companies like Nutanix, Algolia, Workado, or if you're dialing in from India, you might know Razorpay. So I did a whole bunch of investments, and then I decided, as much as I like helping founders build companies and invest money in them, I really like the idea of taking an idea from nothing and building it into a real product and getting customers to actually use it. And that's how I ended up on this journey to being a founder 3-4 years ago.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Tell us a little bit about Skyflow. What gave birth to the idea? What was like that moment where you say, you know what, this is what I'm going to try to solve in the marketplace, and what does the company do?
Sure. In some ways, Skyflow is a very simple idea. When you walk into a pharmacy chain like CVS or Walgreens and you want to pick up a medication, you'll notice that they need your social security number because they may need to do prior authorization. They need your date of birth so they can prove your age. They need your social security number, and they may also ask for your insurance ID. We give this information willingly to all these pharmacy chains, but they also end up giving them to TurboTax. Tax season is coming soon, especially if you've been investing last year in crypto. And you give it to even things that you probably don't consider as very, very sophisticated companies. So if you buy coffee every day, you swing by a Starbucks and you want to order ahead, well, guess what? They know where you live. They know your credit card number. What's happened over the years is sometimes people refer to this as boiling of the frog. Essentially, we were used to giving our personal information maybe to the US government and maybe your bank. But over the years, a lot of companies have what I call become bankified. The technical term for this is digital transformation. I hate that word because it doesn't really mean much. But I like the idea of bankification in the sense that there are lots of things that we do business with. Even as something as simple as walking into 7-Eleven and trying to buy a beer, they may want you to prove your age. And the way we do that today is by giving them our driver's license, which has way more information than being able to prove that Kim is 21, right? There are simpler
just
ways.
Just barely.
Yes. And the question that always popped up in my head while I was working at these amazing data companies like Oracle and cloud companies like Salesforce is, how come we trust these institutions with all this data? What's happening behind the scenes? And if you've been reading anything in the news lately, our data is making its way to all kinds of places where it shouldn't be. There's dark markets, there's hackers, but more than that, actually, people just make stupid mistakes. A call center worker forgets to log out, an engineer writes a portal but forgets to add an extra check. These things have made us all very, very exposed. And I kept wondering as I met customers while I was at Salesforce and Oracle who wanted to solve this problem meaningfully, but had this dilemma like, how do I actually go about it? Right. So, for example, let's say you were creating a coffee chain with order ahead or an online pharmacy or telehealth company. You would need that data. Like you literally cannot function without having access to the data. And what's happened is in parallel, while I was thinking about these experiences, that's this kind of person I am. um, New technologies were emerging that not everybody here may be familiar with. Things like homomorphic encryption, which is a way of encrypting data such that you can still use it. Zero knowledge proof, which literally means what it says, means without knowing something, can I prove something? So, can I prove that I'm 21 without giving you like where I was born and all the details? That's called zero knowledge proofs. Technologies like secure enclaves. So a lot of people here either use an Android or an Apple phone. When you use Google Pay, Apple Pay, there's a small little chip on your phone that is isolated from your main phone chip, which actually does some computations to protect the data from the rest of the phone. So these things were emerging, all these technologies, whether it's secure enclaves, whether it's new kinds of encryption, new kinds of tokenization. And yet, we were getting hacked more and more every day. More breaches like Equifax, more fines against companies like Facebook. And it just felt like if we can put these ideas all together and build a product in the cloud, which could be as easy to use as Stripe is for processing credit cards or Twilio is for making phone calls, we can solve this problem in a fundamental way. And that would make all of our lives better. Imagine being able to use a service for filing your taxes, except that online service doesn't really have access to your social security number. They ask for it,
Love
it
it.
gets encrypted at the end, it gets stored in a vault, and when they need to send it to the IRS, the vault sends it over. All through the process, this online tax company basically keeps a hands-off approach. That would be the ideal world, and that would apply not just to tax companies, but also to advertising and almost anything that we interact with in our online lives could be done in this modern way. So that was the inspiration for starting the company and saying, hey, if we could build something like that, it wouldn't be amazing? A lot of developers' lives would get easier, but fundamentally, it would alter the way we trust companies. And if you think about what's happened in the last 2.5 years with COVID, we kept the economy going because we trust each other. Like I've never met you in person, right? We're talking to each other. I bought, cars. I bought things. So the glue that holds this economy together, what makes us all work with each other is trust. And if we can ensure greater trust
Completely.
by using new innovations, I think we can truly transform how the world works.
Fantastic. All right, so let's go right into it because we have a topic. We want to dig in and see what we can learn. How do we solve this problem? I have a feeling you got the answer. So let's see what we can learn. Kim, please, let's kick off the topic and see what we can learn.
For sure. Thank you, Tulio. Thank you, Anshu, for joining us today. The topic that you chose today, Anshu, is what if privacy had an API? And more specifically, how can data privacy vaults empower organizations to best address their security, governance, and compliance needs and concerns? So, my question for you is we had to go back to the very basics. Help me out here. So I can fully understand your tagline. Can you please explain to me what an API is and its function and how privacy would intertwine in that? Now, in my brain, I've kind of think of an API in some terms like a connector or a bridge, but I've got an inkling that it's a lot more than that.
Well,
Somebody finally asked the question. What is an API?
I don't have to pretend that I don't know. I'll say it.
yeah.
There's a lot of people who actually don't know. Go ahead, please.
So I think API literally stands for Application Programming Interface. It's just a way. So the simplest example of an API is things and services that you already use. So for example, when you walk up to a pharmacy, they may have a way for you to explain how you want your prescription rendered. So you don't just go in there and start waving your arms and speaking in arbitrary language. If you are in Greece, they may want you to write down the prescription in Greek language. The prescription identifies who was the doctor who actually sent you this prescription. So API is simply a way of defining request something and then to receive that service. That's all an API is, and we use APIs all. Make a phone call to somebody and we are both in the same country, the API simply, but if you wanted to call me plus 91 would be the country code, so you would add that to the phone number, right? So that's part of the API. If you and I spoke the same language, then we would just talk to each other. But let's say you spoke Chinese and I spoke Greek, we would need a translator. We would call that an API connector, someone who converts what you're saying into what I understand, and then when I reply to you, convert it back. So all of these concepts come together. Fundamentally, what happens is on the internet, your computer, some program running on the internet is calling another program on the internet. And for them to make sense of what they're doing with each other, they need to have an API interface, which is clearly understood, because you can't, imagine when you pick up a phone with someone you've never talked to before from a different culture. Sometimes we may end up talking to each other without making sense till you figure out, okay, I say something, then I pause, wait for you to answer, and then ask you follow-up questions. These are all.
And somehow we think if we do it louder, it will help.
That's called the foreign
so
language.
APIs have been around for thousands of years. They've been human APIs.
Yes.
Very cool. Well, thank you for explaining that. And I think it makes a lot of sense, right? So making privacy easier, basically. Taking privacy from one place and putting it into another seamlessly, which is what you kind of talked about in your intro. Okay, I get it. Yeah. Thank you.
So Anshu, I love this idea. If I could, I love this idea that you presented where I don't have to show my license, for example, to prove who I am or to prove my age or other intrinsic things that might be of value to whoever I'm presenting it to, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the thought? Is it some kind of QR code I present, some other identifier? How do you create an environment where we move away from using personal IDs and using some kind of an identifier that is readily acceptable and certified, if you will? Who would do the certification that that's valid? Curious what your thought process is around that.
Sure. So we've been doing this already in other domains. So for example, when you log into a website, you don't really enter your password in the raw. It actually generates some kind of an encrypted hash that gets compared. And if those hash matches, then you're allowed in to log in. Once you log in, sometimes a token gets created, it gets sent out. So these concepts have existed. Things like hashing, encryption, tokening have existed in other workflows. We've taken those ideas at Skyflow and tried to apply them to things like social security numbers and credit card numbers. What makes it unique is, unlike a password where I just have to match whether you're giving me the right password or not, when you give me something like your date of birth or your credit card number, after a while, when you come back to me, you may expect me to do certain workflows for you on your behalf or in interacting with you. So, all of us, when we call up our telco, we forget our account number, they ask you for last 4 digits of your credit card number or social security number. You need to be able to do that match on encrypted data. So what Skyflow has done is created a new kind of technology called the privacy vault, and it's built using something called polymorphic data encryption, where the core concept is that we are encrypting the data that the consumer is giving in multiple unique formats, such that while the data is still encrypted, we can perform workflows and analytics and API calls without decrypting the data. And this means that if you're, let's say, a credit agency, I can actually run a credit score on Kim without actually looking at her social security number in the raw, because if I can map it to another number, unique ID, I can do these calculations on encrypted data. So that's really what the core concept behind using these modern technologies is.
I think it's really interesting concept. And going back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show with trust, I personally, as a user, I honestly have blind trust in most applications that I put on my phone or wherever. I rarely, and I think I'm probably not the only one, rarely will I ever read terms and conditions or anything like that. I do think I have a certain savviness about me where I'm not going to share private information over a text message or, fishy emails and things like that. But overall, it's this sort of blind trust. So I think what you're explaining helps with the trust issue, but when we're encrypting it and essentially not ever decrypting it, what are the fail safes? How do we make sure that you are in fact sharing my data? And what if I were to get mixed up with someone else? Yes. It seems like trust is still a factor here.
Yes. Well, when you log into any application, how do you trust that they know you? Because they are matching the password. So at some fundamental level, we are relying on the technologies, but these are tested. We go through certifications like SOC 2 and PCI. We are HIPAA compliant. So there's a lot of things that go on top of what we built technology-wise. We have a team of about 55 plus engineers. Every day they wake up, they're only thinking about one problem, which is how do we securely keep data safe for all of these customers that we work with. So that's really where the innovation meets the human resources. On top of that, when we work with a business, let's say you were an online stock trading application and you wanted to use the Skyflow vault, you don't have to trust Skyflow. We can actually give you a special instance just for your company in a VPC, a virtual private cloud. You can actually bring your own key management system, your own keys. So the idea is you're simply using our service that we're managing for you, but you don't really have to trust us. We don't really come in the data plane. You can bring your own keys and stuff. It's kind of like when you open a locker at a bank, they oftentimes will have two keys. One is given to you and one is stored at the bank. And both keys have to be turned for someone to be able to actually take information out of it. Similar concepts are being applied to online data, and that's what Skyflow does.
So, Ansu, who's the client? Who's the end user? Is this something that is planned to be offered directly to the consumer, or businesses adopting this? Walk us through the use cases, if you don't mind.
Sure. So, our Skyflow's customers are companies with businesses that have consumer data. So examples include Nomi Health, which is a health insurance platform. They basically store lots and lots of data about COVID-19 immunization records. They actually have payment information. They have identity information. All this information they need to manage and secure so they can actually deliver the service to the consumers. When you're onboarding a user onto a cruise, let's say, someone needs to verify all that information. So a company like Nomi Health will manage that information, and they will be utilizing the Skyflow vault underlying it. Other examples would include, an online banking application, online credit card application platform. We have customers across digital health, financial services, fintech, as well as what you would call a regular run-of-the-mill B2C business. Almost anybody you can imagine who's collecting things like social security numbers, phone numbers, email addresses is at risk today, and those
Right.
become our target customers.
Interesting. All right. Go ahead.
So yeah, I'm just wondering with this. I think this makes a lot of sense for the companies, right? Software companies. What would you say to the users like me? How would you how do you convince the everyday layman that we need to be concerned with privacy and discourage me from having, just this ultimate blind trust and clicking I accept all the time?
Well, I don't have to convince you. The bad guys are doing that job pretty well, right? If you just go on Twitter and see how many people's brokerage accounts get hacked, email accounts get hacked. It's kind of like terrible. Our job is not to scare you, the consumer. Our job is actually to help businesses be more trustworthy by making it simpler for you to actually protect the data, right? And I think this is where research and commercialization become different things. So researchers can often worry about like corner cases, like, hey, everybody should have their own private key and this and that. But in reality, we are still living in a world where people are sharing passwords. And what you see leading companies like Apple and even Google and others are doing is they're encouraging you to not reuse passwords. They're encouraging you to make it simpler so you can log in using two-factor authentication. When you make security easier for the businesses and for the consumers, we all are more secure and safer. So none of the businesses we're working with are keen to get hacked or to be not compliant because their brand gets damaged. We were talking to somebody at Netflix who's an advisor to the company, and he said they had this internal exercise where they're like, what's the worst thing that can happen to us? And the answer was the best thing that can happen to them was be on the cover of a newspaper like New York Times for good reasons. And the worst thing is to be on the cover of New York Times for the wrong reason. And
Right.
people are motivated. Laws are being passed by governments globally, especially Europe. But also, we've seen companies like Facebook have suffered $5 billion fines for some of these breaches and the data getting into the wrong hands. So people are motivated. I don't see any lack of motivation part of businesses. It's just been too hard, right? Think of all the things you have to do to make data secure. It's really, really hard. Not every engineer understands what it takes. Even if you understand it, think about like when you bought your home, how many people rekey their home, right? You're supposed to actually replace all the locks on a home when you rent a new home. 99% of people I know don't do that, right? We all know the previous renter can just come in and enter. Similar things happen in the enterprise. It's just too easy to encrypt data once, leave it lying there, have multiple copies of your social security numbers and phone numbers because marketing needs a copy and billing department needs a copy. When security is hard and requires effort, we all end up being less secure and having less privacy. Our job is to make it seamless and invisible to the consumer.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that. It's actually, I think, backwards to what might be your gut reaction. Like security must be complicated, but it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. The simpler that it can be, the more it's going to be adopted.
I was thinking when you said, the companies would get fined or pay penalties when they have breaches. I was thinking, well, who penalizes the IRS when they had a security breach? They had one not too long ago. Give money back to the consumer when you get your breach. No,
I was wondering what happened to that $5 billion.
So, all right, let's shift gears a little bit. This is very eye-opening in terms of where this can go because there's so many options, the cybersecurity, privacy, so many options in the market right now, and it gets really confusing and overwhelming. And something simple, I'm all for simplicity. I believe big ideas are very simple. So congratulations there. Tell us a little bit about the culture of your company. We have some listeners who could be potentially interested in coming to join you guys. I know you recently raised Series B and you're expanding, so there's probably some folks who would be interested in learning what's the day in the life at Skyflow. Can you share a little bit about maybe some of the values that are important to you? What kind of people come work there and why?
So I think our culture is mission driven and fun and full of people who have lots of experience. And I think these three things kind of go hand in hand. Especially in a data platform company, you can't just have fun unless you know how to have fun responsibly. So, people really enjoy themselves because we trust each other. To build that trust, we all align around a common purpose. We all see that it just makes sense. Like one of the best compliments I've heard our customers or employees give us before signing up with us is to say, I thought this already existed. Like, why hasn't someone already built this thing? This is so simple and obvious. And I think when we meet engineers or product managers or marketing people who get it, who get that this is how the world always should be, they sign up. And we try to be respectful of each other. If you go to read our Glassdoor ratings, about one third of our employees have left a Glassdoor rating, and I don't think we'll ever maintain 100% forever, but right now our Glassdoor ratings are 5.0, which is 100% of the people have left
Wow.
highest possible rating. I don't know if
Congratulations. That's amazing. That is really impressive.
It
and
completely
and
is.
yeah,
No, go
and
ahead.
it's not because we give them, oatmeal with massages or something every morning. Most of our employees joined during this COVID era. So even though we have beautiful offices in Palo Alto and Bangalore, lots of people work remote. It's really the culture, how people get treated. We are working in a very, very intense industry, but that doesn't mean we can't have fun along the way.
Thank you for sharing, and a good point. So we know that you've had fun. My final question, I think the final question for you is, what is one thing you might have done differently as you've started this company? I think you said 3-4 years ago.
Mhm.
What might change? What might you have done differently?
I think I would have probably hired salespeople earlier. I think we had about 50 engineers before we really started hiring salespeople. That's very unusual. Uh, the good thing about doing that was we had a really stable product. We had built enough functionality that salespeople could get productive day one. But I think now that we know how much demand is in their market, I wish I'd started hiring salespeople even sooner and more marketing. But that's a good problem to have. I would rather be in a position where I wish I had more salespeople than I wish, like, I didn't. So but yeah, if I knew what I know now, I would have hired more salespeople, more marketing people earlier in the life cycle, because there is, once customers and developers, especially for our customers, our developers and CTOs, once they understand what we're doing, it's kind of like,
Mhm.
this makes sense. Why didn't you talk to me earlier? And
Uh-huh.
so I would have doubled down on more go to market functions earlier.
All right. Well, that's really good advice. And again, it definitely shows to the simplicity and the necessity of your product. To those landscapers are here, I think.
Yeah, you can hear. I'm muting myself. Well, listen, it's been great to have you. It's been very educational. We wish you a lot of success. We're over time. Unfortunately, time ticks away, but we wish you a lot of success. We'll love to have you back at some point. Maybe talk about some additional use cases, how you're changing the landscape of privacy and security. We'd love to keep up with our guests. Stay with us as we go off the air in just a second. Kim, do we have anything else coming up
We
for the
do.
rest of the week?
We do. We have one more show. Unfortunately, Thursday's show has needed to be posted tomorrow at 12 noon Pacific as well. Speaking with Shwish Goswami, the CEO at Surf. Building an equitable data economy. How can consumers get value for their data? So don't miss it. Dojo Live, 12 o'clock Pacific. Of course, Anshu, thank you so much for being here. And Tulio, see you tomorrow.
See you guys tomorrow.